And before I arose from bed the second morning after Thanksgiving this year and engaged me in a meditation on their implications. The adjective meek is defined in the dictionary as manifesting patience and long-suffering, enduring injury without resentment, deficient in spirit and courage, submissive, not violent or strong, gentle, moderate, weak. You'll find such definitions there. Now, used as a collective noun, as in the statement I just opened with, meek refers to people who exhibit the qualities of patience in hardship and suffering, submissiveness under oppression and tyranny, humility. These meek are understood to be the poor, the afflicted, the weak, the oppressed. As I contemplated these meanings, I saw this Old Testament declaration as heralding the unprecedented possibilities of the covenant of Baha'u'llah. Thinking about it deepened my appreciation of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, which clearly brings fulfillment of the promise assured to the meek of the earth. Remember when Baha'u'llah wrote to these leaders, these kings and rulers, giving them actually the key to resolving the problems of the world, and how they reacted or did not react at all? And he said that since they had refused the most great peace, they would have to settle for the lesser peace. And then later on we discovered that he turned over the business of reordering the affairs of mankind to the people. Later on, the kings can come back. A fact about this Old Testament statement is that it was surely inspired. It was an inspired assertion, for it was later endorsed by Jesus Christ in his Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the meek, Jesus affirmed, for they shall inherit the earth. From the beginning of recorded history until the appearance of Baha'u'llah in the 19th century, nations for the most part blithely disregarded the afflictions of the poor and weak that constituted the bulk of their populations. At the time of Baha'u'llah's ministry, the world was largely divided up among a few imperial powers. Most of them lived in small nations, England, Belgium, small places, Portugal, Spain. But they divvied up the world. And the vast majority of their subjects were the victims of injustice, a condition which they endured patiently, often with only a prayer and a hope for a better day. To mention just one of these powers, the British Empire alone occupied 1/4 of the planet, in which as much as 1/3 of the world's population lived. Isn't that an amazing thing? This little island had such force. What have we seen since the opening of the new age of Baha'u'llah? We have witnessed, and are still witnessing, a social and political evolution, revolutionary in its suddenness and force, which proceeds in a manner and on a scale not experienced before. Among the significant developments that took place in less than a century after the ascension of Baha'u'llah, three are particularly relevant in this context. One, the fall of mighty dynasties. The establishment of independent nations by formerly colonized peoples. Three, a rapid rise in global awareness of many forms of injustice afflicting peoples, and the consequent multiplication of organized remedial efforts. These days, we hear frequently of non-governmental organizations concerned with a variety of social ills. The Baha'i international community, for one, has emerged as one of the foremost non-governmental organizations in the world. I don't know if you know that, but that's a fact. Now, the speed of these developments is an historic phenomenon that can be fully appreciated only by those who recognize Baha'u'llah. The statement from Psalm 37, as already cited, is extracted from verse 11, which says in full, "But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace." From a Baha'i perspective, it is not difficult to arrive at a fairly good understanding of this whole verse and its future implications concerning the abundance of peace. The verse is shaped as it appears in this psalm, is thought-provoking, especially in the light of Baha'u'llah's revelation. It is concerned with, that is, the whole psalm is concerned with the spiritual and social effects of the greed, corruption, and pride of the rich, of their evil deeds, which among other consequences exploit and oppress the poor. It exhorts all affected by such evils not to react with anger, jealousy, and vengeance, through which relief, but rather to trust in God, through which relief will eventually come. Evildoers will be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herbs, while faith in God will ensure for the poor the inheritance of the earth and the abundance of peace. I was curious as to how theologians might interpret all of this. So I dug into a couple of reference works, more than a couple. One of them, the New Interpreter's Bible, the other, the Expositor's Bible Commentary, and I found some rather interesting things there. But one of my findings will suffice. I'll just mention it. One of these books says, the inheritance of the land refers to Canaan. That's a verse there that talks about a line that talks about the inheritance of the land. Then it goes on to say, but the promise of God extends to all God's people and to the whole earth, as Jesus made clear in the Sermon on the Mount. And then there is, among the references given to back up these points, Isaiah is cited. Now, as you know, the prophecies of Isaiah about world peace are of particular relevance to the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, who, of course, announced the advent of a new world order. Shoghi Effendi affirmed in a letter to the American Baha'is that Isaiah foreshadowed the establishment of the lesser peace, as foretold by Baha'u'llah. This is his statement on page 33 of Citadel of Faith. It says, it, meaning the lesser peace, must in the end culminate in the unfurling of the banner of the most great peace in the golden age of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. So that was quite a reach that Isaiah had in his sayings. Now, to understand the wondrous system, and I use this term from the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the wondrous system Baha'u'llah announces in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, is to appreciate the means by which the meek are to inherit the earth. For the system promises to be a global structure of unity. With the coming of Baha'u'llah, divine processes were set in motion which clearly are changing the conduct of human affairs in all regions and at all levels. For any one of us interested in gaining a proper perspective of these processes, or in supporting efforts to improve the lot of the human race, serious attention must be given to the essentials of the administrative order of Baha'u'llah. It is obvious to any knowledgeable Baha'i that what the world needs are the principles and practices of Baha'i administration. We must find ways of making the viability, the efficacy of such principles evident in our own lives and in our efforts, so that others may benefit from their salutary effects and be prompted to emulate them. In the world order of Baha'u'llah, the management of human affairs is not exclusive to those who rule, but is a necessary responsibility which all share, in which all can play a vital role. In other words, every member of the Baha'i community is a part of the administrative order. It's not just a matter that rests with the elected bodies. Indeed, how else will the suffering masses be able to claim their inheritance, if not by participating in an orderly attention to the matters that affect their lives? The Baha'i administration is indeed the ultimate means of their empowerment. It is no wonder then that Shoghi Effendi exhorted us to master the essentials of Baha'i administration. This was not simply so that we could manage the affairs of the Baha'i community, necessary as that is. It was more profoundly so that we might create the nucleus and set the pattern for the new world order that Baha'u'llah has offered as his revolutionizing legacy to all the peoples of the planet. Now, the Rabbani Trust, I understand, is primarily concerned with advancing social and economic development. For a Baha'i, the principles of Baha'i administration are of critical importance to success in this field. Let me invite you then to a brief review of certain concepts of Baha'i administration. This to encourage efforts not only to practice these principles, but also to seize every opportunity to impart them to others. Such imparting is in itself a service to those who are engaged in this work, and even more, a service to the world. In other words, what I'm saying is that getting across these principles and an understanding of them to others is social and economic development. Now, about the administration. The world order of Baha'u'llah, as you know, was foreshadowed in the writings of the Bab, his forerunner. The Persian Bayan, the mother book of his dispensation, in this book, the Bab explicitly refers to it. He says this: "Well is it with him who fixeth his gaze upon the order of Baha'u'llah and rendereth thanks unto his Lord." The Bab wrote this. Now, in announcing the earth-shaking effects of that order, Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the mother book of his dispensation, asserts the following: "The world's equilibrium hath been upset through the vibrating influence of this this new world order. Mankind's ordered life hath been revolutionized through the agency of this unique, this wondrous system the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed. Baha'u'llah's announcement of a new world order marks the fruition of a purpose that has been evolving since the beginning of human life. World order is an object of human aspirations to which philosophers, poets, and other enlightened thinkers, not to mention the prophets themselves, have given thought from the antiquity, at least from the antiquity of Greece to modern times. The idea has grown with the stages of human development. It has expressed itself in the framework of each of these stages as the sphere of human collective life expanded: family, tribe, city-state, nation-state. These, the circles of unity in the collective conduct and social interaction of humanity, have thus gradually been widened. These stages represent milestones in the evolution of human society. So as we got from, say, family collectivity to the tribal one, we were really establishing the building blocks of the New World Order, which was in the distant future. The effort from time to time to form leagues and federations, whether of city-states or nation-states. Oh yes, back in ancient Grecian times, they did have federation of Grecian states, as we talk about federation of states now. Now this effort has demonstrated through the ages the urge of the race to achieve political unity as a matter of necessity, if for no other reason. But spiritual unity, as a principle of life transcending mere politics, has ever been promulgated by the divine prophets. By ignoring this principle too often, humanity has suffered disastrous consequences. Fortunately, we live in a day of renewal, the time of a fresh outpouring of divine grace. The newness, or I should say the nowness, that is the timeliness, the nowness of bringing about a new world order, this most exalted goal of human development, is verified by Baha'u'llah in many passages of his writings. Among them is this arresting assertion. I get goosebumps every time I read it, and I've recited it to myself 1,000 times. He says, listen to this carefully, the purpose underlying all creation is the revelation of this most sublime, this most holy day. The day known as the Day of God in his books and scripture, the day which all the prophets and the chosen ones and the holy ones have wished to witness. Friends, this is the day in which we live. It's an amazing thought. So, indeed, this is the time. The social progress of the human race, marked by the stages of its development, from the birth of family life to the emergence of the nation state, has at last reached that stage when it must mature and attain its fruition in a global order. The driving, the operating principle of this ultimate goal is identified by Baha'u'llah as the oneness of humankind. This signals the coming of age of the entire human race. In other words, the object of the revelation of Baha'u'llah is to make the unity of the human race a global reality, a reality that is comprehensive, pervasive, and all-encompassing. This is a matter that affects both the transformation of our inner selves and the expression of our outer conduct. Clearly then, the long period of human social evolution has arrived at its final and most glorious stage. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the cause of Baha'u'llah and the appointed interpreter of his writings, interprets the meaning of this principle of the oneness of mankind in unmistakable terms. The following example will suffice. He writes in World Order of Baha'u'llah, right about page 41 or thereabouts, you'll find it. He says, "Let there be no mistake. The principle of the oneness of mankind, the pivot around which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve, is no mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. Its appeal," he says, "is not to be merely identified with a reawakening of the spirit of brotherhood and goodwill among men. It's that, but it's far more than that. Its implications," he says, "are deeper. Its claims greater than any which the prophets of old were allowed to advance." Now listen. Its message, he says, is applicable not only to the individual, but concerns itself primarily with the nature of those essential relationships that must bind all the states and nations as members of one human family. Now, friends, we have difficulty binding our family in one. You know how it is these days. But nations and states are to act as one human family? Think of this. He says it does not constitute merely the enunciation of an ideal, but stands inseparably associated with an institution adequate to embody its truth, demonstrate its validity, and perpetuate its influence. I've been wondering what this institution might be. Now comes, I think, the statement that is sort of the centerpiece of this whole explanation. He says, it implies an organic change in the structure of present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet experienced. Big stuff. So, sitting in our chairs today, no matter for how long we've been Baha'is, we don't quite know what he's talking about yet. We have never experienced it. He tells us that it calls for no less than the reconstruction of and the demilitarization of the whole civilized world. A world organically unified in all the essential aspects of its life, its political machinery, its spiritual aspiration, its trade and finance, its script and language, and yet infinite in the diversity of the national characteristics of its federated units. In other words, we believe in preserving unity in diversity. So it's not to be a monolithic state where everybody is doing the same thing at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, this challenge of social and political transformation has struck a growing number of thinkers. One of them has this to say. Listen to this. The one thing we can be sure of is that the world that will emerge from the present rearrangement of values, beliefs, social and economic structures, of political concepts and systems, indeed, of worldviews, will be different from anything anyone today imagines. In some areas, and especially in society and its structure, Basic shifts have already happened. That the new society will be both a non-socialist and post-capitalist society is practically certain. And it is certain also that its primary resources will be knowledge. This also means that it will be a society of organizations. Certain it is that in politics we have already shifted from the 400 years of the sovereign nation-state to a pluralism in which the nation-state will be one rather than the only unit of political integration. Isn't that an interesting thought coming from a non-Baha'i? This is a man named Peter Drucker, who has written some rather marvelous books about the state of things in the world. Now, getting back to Shoghi Effendi, he tells us about this principle of the oneness of mankind. He says it represents the consummation of human evolution. There's a huge idea for you. And it will happen. It must happen inevitably. Now, Shoghi Effendi has greatly expanded our understanding of the magnitude of Baha'u'llah's call for the unity of the human race as the will of God for this age. Baha'u'llah says this: "It beseemeth all men in this day to take firm hold on the most great name and to establish the unity of mankind. There is no place to flee to, no refuge that anyone can seek except him." Now, Shoghi Effendi illuminates our understanding of this assertion in his writings as follows. And this is, to me, one of the greatest paragraphs ever written. Listen to this. I'll read it slowly. He says, "The revelation of Baha'u'llah, whose supreme mission is none other but the achievement of this organic and spiritual unity of the whole body of nations, should, if we be faithful to its implications, be regarded as signalizing through its advent the coming of age of the entire human race." So just one thought: the coming of age of the entire human race. Now, listen to this. It should be viewed not merely as yet another spiritual revival in the ever-changing fortunes of mankind, not only as a further stage in a chain of progressive revelations, nor even as the culmination of one of a series of recurrent prophetic cycles. No. But rather as marking the last and highest stage in the stupendous evolution of man's collective life on this planet. Have you soaked that in? Marking the last and highest stage in the stupendous evolution of man's collective life on this planet. Think about it. He goes on. The emergence of a world community, the consciousness of world citizenship, the founding of a world civilization and culture, all of which must synchronize with the initial stages and the unfoldment of the golden age of the Baha'i era, all of these, world community and so on. He says they should by their very nature be regarded, as far as this planetary life is concerned, as, and listen to this now, the furthermost limits in the organization of human society. So we have three things, three explosive ideas here. The coming of age of the entire human race. The highest stage, the last and highest stage in the evolution of man's collective life on this planet, and attaining the furthermost limits in the organization of human society. Now, friends, you need an expanded awareness to take all of this in. Now, with all of that, our coming of age, in other words, if you think of the human being from fetus to infancy to childhood to adolescence to adulthood, he's talking about the adulthood of the human race. All of this evolution was to bring us to this stage. And it's not the end, he says. Though man as an individual must indeed as a result of such a consummation continue indefinitely to progress and develop. When you become an adult, you don't stop developing. In fact, you become mature, you're able to make use of all the things you've learned, you're creative, you can do things that you couldn't possibly have done when you were younger. So that's where the world is going, that's where humanity as a whole is going, that's where politics is going, that's where everything is going. To this highly mature stage. Now this is heavy stuff. Joke 3. Give me a chance to breathe for a minute. So now, friends, the real question is, by what spiritual and practical means can so awesome an outcome be realized? Because it is awesome. That's a word that the youth use a lot these days, and it's a proper use here. Awesome. How, in fact, will the New World Order come about? This, the Baha'i writings tell us, will involve the workings of two simultaneous processes initiated by the revelation of Baha'u'llah. One is directly related to the administrative order he has ordained. Its course has been set, as Shoghi Effendi explains, by what he says, or the revelation is the revelation of those stupendous tablets constituting the charter of Abdul Baha's divine plan. So one course is set and involves us as Baha'is. He says that it will be consummated through the emergence of the Baha'i World Commonwealth and the golden age of the Baha'i dispensation. If you want a reference for all of this stuff, go to Citadel of Faith. There is a letter there entitled Challenging Requirements of the Present Hour. Go up to page 30. Start reading from page 30 to 38. It will blow your mind. Now, this process involves the followers of Baha'u'llah directly, and those in North America particularly. We seem to forget this these days. So that's one process. The other process is destined, as the Guardian says, to lead through a process of victories and reverses to the political unification of the Eastern and Western hemispheres, to the emergence of a world government and the establishment of the lesser peace, as foretold by Baha'u'llah and foreshadowed by the prophet Isaiah. But this lesser peace will not come about through direct action of the Baha'is, but will involve the American people and government particularly. So this is what Baha'u'llah left to the rulers and leaders to bring about the lesser peace. That's what we're talking about here as a second process. And we have no direct responsibility for it, but we do have some indirect responsibility. You know, the Baha'u'llah tells the House of Justice that it must promote the lesser peace. And the House of Justice is trying its best. As you know, it put out this statement, the promise of world peace, remember? That's one of its efforts. Okay. Now this lesser peace, then, Shoghi Effendi tells us, must, in the end, culminate in the unfurling of the banner of the most great peace in the golden age of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. So you see these two parallel tracks are running. The one on which the Baha'is have been set and the one on which the world leaders have been set, and they will. These two processes relating to the lesser peace and the most great peace indicate a division of labor, as I call it, so to speak, the results of which are destined to merge. In one respect, this labor engages the rulers of nations who, with any direct action of the Baha'is, organize a world government, a purely political necessity compelled by world conditions. In the other respect, it employs the efforts of the followers of Baha'u'llah in two ways. In spreading the new teachings so as to effect a spiritual transformation in the character of individuals throughout the planet, and in raising up the institutions of the administrative order of Baha'u'llah, which is to serve as the nucleus and pattern of the new world order forecast by him. Now, the ultimate merging of these two essential processes will, in a sense, involve the effects of a chrysalis from which the new world order will come forth. You know what I mean by chrysalis? As you know, the chrysalis is the ultimate stage in the life form of a caterpillar, and the initial stage in the shaping of life of a butterfly. Ordinarily, one does not discern the butterfly in the caterpillar. The activities of the two are so dissimilar. One creeps, the other flies, has wings. One sees even less by looking at the chrysalis. You know, it's a sort of hard thing sitting there, which assumes a dormant, apparently lifeless state. It hides the great transformation occurring within. Then one day, a creature of exquisite beauty bursts forth. The organic change resulting from this metamorphosis suggests the nature of what, at a totally different spiritual and social level, can be expected with regard to the establishment of the New World Order, by which the most great peace will be sustained in the golden age of the Baha'i dispensation. So you got my little metaphor or simile there. I'm thinking that if I don't know what the New World Order is, it must be that we are going through the experience, the caterpillar stage now, and that we will go through the chrysalis, which will combine these two processes, and at the end will come this thing that we have not yet experienced, which will be new and different and beautiful and extraordinary. Now, the Baha'i writings speak of an administrative order and a new world order. How should they be perceived? That's the question. We must, first of all, bear in mind that the administrative order and the New World Order, though closely related concepts, are not one and the same thing. The administrative order is a divinely ordained agency that is indispensable to the emergence of the New World Order. A New World Order will be the fruit of what both the Baha'i community and nation states do to bring about world unity. This is not a matter, really, that we can fully comprehend at this time. Commenting on the goal of a New World Order, Shoghi Effendi writes, he says, to claim, to have grasped all the implications of Baha'u'llah's prodigious scheme for worldwide human solidarity, or to have fathomed its import, would be presumptuous on the part of even the declared supporters of his faith. To attempt to visualize in all its possibilities, to visualize it in all its possibilities, to estimate its future benefits, to picture its glory, would be premature at even so advanced a stage in the evolution of mankind. So, we really cannot fully picture what a united world would be like, with everybody behaving well, loving each other, helping each other, having a world government, nation states that behave like families. My God, imagine that. I mean, if you look at the activities of our own government these days, you cannot have any hope of that. But Baha'u'llah says it's going to happen. As to the administrative order itself, what we do know of it is that it is the structure of unity designed by Baha'u'llah to canalize the creative and constructive forces released by his revelation. It enables society to tap the benefits, transformative influences flowing from that revelation, which are modernizing human life. Modernizing human life. Divine revelation is, of course, the mainspring of modernity in any age. People don't know this, but it's a fact. The system of Baha'u'llah combines the spiritual and practical requirements of life in a union that ensures the integrity of our actions and the soundness of our progress. This is so because the system is founded on the principles of unity and justice. Unity of the human race is the social, political, as well as spiritual expression of love. Justice is its mainstay. As Baha'u'llah has said, the light of men is justice. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. Isn't that a marvelous statement? What we may well ask is the nature of this justice that guarantees such a purpose. If we turn to Shoghi Effendi's masterpiece, The Advent of Divine Justice, we will find an illuminating discussion of it. That is, of justice within the rubric of rectitude of conduct. Remember this prerequisites: rectitude of conduct, chaste and holy life, freedom from prejudice. All right, rectitude of conduct is big on justice. In fact, he says it implies what? Justice, equity, honesty, truthfulness, fair-mindedness, trustworthiness, reliability. That's the stuff we're talking about. And he goes on to quote from Baha'u'llah that if we behave in these ways, the effects of the behavior of an individual affects the entire world. Amazing statements you'll find there as to the virtue, the sheer power of individual acts. And Baha'u'llah has asked us, he says, the one thing he asks us is to be just and fair-minded. It is on this foundation of unity and justice that world peace is assured, on which a world civilization is being raised up as a reflection on earth of the kingdom of heaven so long anticipated in the prayer of Jesus Christ. So then, friends, when we study and apply the principles of the administrative order, we are attending to what it means to live successfully in the modern age, what it means to establish the kingdom of God on earth, which Baha'u'llah, the promised one of all ages, has come to accomplish. It is by applying these principles that the meek can realize their inheritance of the earth, as proclaimed in the Sermon on the Mount. That we who follow him have become participants in so exalted an effort indicates the magnitude of the privilege that is ours and that is possible to all who turn to him. Truly, it is a privilege that is inestimable. So you still ask, why a Baha'i administrative order? Shoghi Effendi gives us an answer in World Order of Baha'u'llah on page 19. He gives us many answers, but here's one of them that you might like to contemplate now. He says, few will fail to recognize that the spirit breathed by Baha'u'llah upon the world, and which is manifesting itself with varying degrees of intensity through the efforts consciously displayed by his avowed supporters, and indirectly through certain humanitarian organizations. Now, friends, this force that Baha'u'llah has released doesn't belong just to us who believe in him. It influences everything, everything. And the Guardian is mentioning here, working through the efforts of the Baha'is and the efforts of those engaged in humanitarian organizations. So when he wrote this way back in the early 30s, how many NGOs did we have in the world? You see what has happened? The efflorescence of NGOs, that we can't count them anymore. All concerned with a lot of human beings. You see how Baha'u'llah is working? So if we don't do our tasks, he's not waiting for us. Bear this in mind. He's not waiting. So, to go back to this, few will fail to recognize that the spirit breathed by Baha'u'llah upon the world, and which is manifesting itself with varying degrees of intensity through the efforts consciously displayed by his avowed supporters, and indirectly through certain humanitarian organizations, can never permeate and exercise an abiding influence upon mankind unless and until it incarnates itself in a visible order, which would bear his name, wholly identify itself with his principles, and function in conformity with his laws. So if we don't have this order identified with Baha'u'llah, which prompts us to behave in accordance with the principles he has ordained and the laws he has ordained, nothing will happen. That reminds me that Shoghi Effendi said, this is a sort of stray point, that without the study and application of the administration, the teaching of the cause becomes not only meaningless, but loses in effectiveness and scope. This is pretty heavy stuff. So those people who say, I love Baha'u'llah, but I can't stand the administration, they're walking on the wrong side of the street. So what guarantees do we have of the effectiveness and security of the administrative order? Well, Shoghi Effendi explains it to us again. World Order of Baha'u'llah, page 145. This is what he says. It should be noted in this connection that this administrative order is fundamentally different from anything that any prophet has previously established, inasmuch as Baha'u'llah has himself revealed its principles, established its institutions, appointed the person to interpret his word, and conferred the necessary authority on the body designed to supplement and apply his legislative ordinances. So Baha'u'llah has not left anything to chance. He gave us laws, institutions, interpreter, so we can't misunderstand his intentions, and an exemplar who shows us how to behave. The Guardian goes on to say, therein lies the secret of its strength, its fundamental distinction, and the guarantee against disintegration and schism. So this administrative order is the tent of humanity. Anything that gathers under that tent is safe and secure. All of the activities that we conduct in this world must be under the shelter of that tent, including the things you're concerned about in social and economic development. Now, here is a point that drives home the significance of the administration, and this made in World Order of Baha'u'llah on page 5. You know, there were people who were complaining at the time that the Guardian took over his work that he was fiddling with structures. He wasn't really promoting the love that Abdul Baha had exhibited in the world. So listen to this. He says it should be remembered by every follower of the cause that the system of Baha'i administration is not an innovation imposed arbitrarily upon the Baha'is of the world since the Master's passing. He says that it derives its authority from the will and testament of Abdul Baha, is specifically prescribed in unnumbered tablets, and rests in some of its essential features upon the explicit provisions of the Kitab-i-Aqdas, which is our mother book. He goes on to say it thus unifies and correlates the principles separately laid down by Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. In other words, the administrative order incorporates these principles, unifies them, and is indissolubly bound with the essential verities of the faith. Then he tells us this, and listen closely. To dissociate the administrative principles of the cause from the purely spiritual and humanitarian teachings would be tantamount to what? A mutilation of the body of the cause. A separation that can only result in the disintegration of its component parts and the extinction of the faith itself. So you separate out administration and you've got disaster. Joke 1. So we return to the question, is the Baha'i administrative order to be realized? Okay. The reality and benefits of such an order can be realized only if we recognize our contractual arrangement with Baha'u'llah. I use that word advisedly, our contractual arrangement with Baha'u'llah. And then, by endeavoring to fulfill our part of the contract. Remember hidden words? See? Maybe I'm drying out up here, am I? You see? By recognizing our contractual arrangement and then by endeavoring to fulfill our part. Remember this from the hidden words. Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. This is the whole expression of the covenant, friends, in my view anyhow. At the very heart, then, of this contract is the covenant of Baha'u'llah. I'm going to stop right here. Now, there's a second part to this thing, and the second part will complete the whole argument that I've put before you. I don't know if you realize that the speakers have to do quite a sprint to get up here. So by the time we arrive, we're out of breath. Now, I didn't spend all of my jokes yesterday, you know that. The meek shall inherit the earth. I think you have gathered from now that the proposition in all of this is that the order of Baha'u'llah is that inheritance which has been provided for the meek, and that it offers the masses a means of universal participation in advancing the efforts towards a world civilization. Now, yesterday we ended up trying to explore the idea of this order and what it means, and concluding in a way that the principles of such an order obviously cover whatever efforts we make in social and economic development, and that we ought to learn about them so that we can use them effectively in this work. Now, we ended up exploring the order, and as we began to appreciate the wonder of it all, we asked the question, how is this awesome reality to be realized? And I think we ended at the point where we are saying, thank you. Let me see, this water needs a place to rest. How is the administrative order to be realized? And we ended by saying that the reality and benefits of such an order can be realized only if we recognize our contractual arrangement with Baha'u'llah, and then by endeavoring to fulfill our part of the contract. And we quoted from the hidden words, love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee, which in fact explains the contract rather marvelously and sweetly. Now, at the very heart of this contract, we concluded, is the covenant of Baha'u'llah. So I want to continue now by discussing something about the covenant. Now, the covenant of Baha'u'llah, as I understand it, is the latest extension of the original covenant made by God with his human creatures. The basic covenant is the ancient arrangement by which God promised to send us divine guidance through his messengers. These messengers appear at different intervals of human history. We become a party to the covenant when we recognize the manifestation of God for our time. Each manifestation reinforces this ancient understanding by the arrangement he makes with his people. Now, with specific reference to the covenant of Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi explains that it has two forms. The first is the covenant that every prophet makes with humanity, or more definitely with his people, that they will accept and follow the coming manifestation, who will be the reappearance of his reality. Now, as you know, Baha'u'llah has told us, not until after 1,000 years will such a reappearance occur. Then the Guardian goes on to say, the second form of covenant is such as the one that Baha'u'llah made with his people, that they should accept the Master. The Master, of course, Abdul Baha. Under the same category falls the covenant the Master made with the Baha'is, that they should accept his administration after him. That ends the statement from the Guardian or from his secretary. That's published in Baha'i News way back, number 80, page 5, if you want to make a note of that. Now, the purpose of the covenant, in a sense, is to keep humanity connected to divine reality from age to age. This divine reality is a reference, at least in my mind, to the one source, the one truth, the one faith, as revealed to humanity in stages, in accordance with the ability of souls to comprehend. This reality is thus progressively revealed with the successive appearances of the manifestations of God. Now, with each appearance, we seem to invent a new religion, but the whole point is that there's one faith, and you have these different chapters with the manifestations coming. But our history and the circumstances of life on earth have not aided us to appreciate that singular point until now, when we have really a whole world that has been discovered. In another sense, the purpose of the covenant is to ensure the fulfillment of God's will for the human race. Now, there are two documents that contain the provisions of the Baha'i covenant. The Kitab-i-Ad, which Baha'u'llah wrote with his own hand, and Kitab-i-Ad means the book of my covenant. And then there's the Will and Testament, which of Abdul Baha, which he wrote in his own hand. Documents are closely related. Reading them in tandem and considering their contents together make their inseparable relationship clear. The Will and Testament, I see, as I understand it, completes our understanding of the Kitab-i-Ad and certain provisions of the Kitab-i-Aqdas itself. Now, if you read them together, you will see that Baha'u'llah has made certain points in his Kitab-i-Ad which Abdul Baha amplifies in the Will and Testament. If I don't have a moment now or the time now to go through it with you. If I did, I would go through the whole exercise and show it to you. The Will and Testament completes our understanding of the Kitab-i-Ad and certain provisions of the Kitab-i-Aqdas itself. That's what I said earlier. Generally, our discussion of the covenant focuses on certain provisions on which special emphasis is, of course, due. These have principally to do with such matters as successorship, the authority to interpret and to legislate, and protection of the faith. These are, of course, of fundamental importance. And at the time of the passing of Abdul Baha, were emphasized up until this day, and they deserve emphasis. But there is far more to the covenant than these. Appreciation of its other provisions is necessary if we are to appreciate the comprehensiveness of its purpose. Now, this is not the occasion to elaborate on this subject, and so a few details must suffice for now. In the Kitab-i-Ad, Baha'u'llah reaffirms his appointment of Abdul Baha as his successor. He's the center of the covenant. I say reaffirm because this is stated in the Kitab-i-Aqdas itself. This, of course, this provision is an indescribable prize among Baha'u'llah's bequests to humankind. Among Baha'u'llah's other bequests are the principle and goal of the oneness of humankind. The very second paragraph of the Kitab tells us that the reason that he went through all of this suffering is to bring us this unity, to bring harmony to the world. One of these bequests is also the administrative institutions. And then you have indispensable guidance regarding the prerequisites for success, spiritual and material, as well as our relationships to one another and to society. He tells us how to relate to kings, how to relate to one another, what to do about society. Now, included in this guidance is his admonition to us to serve all nations and to strive for the betterment of the world. That's in the Kitab. He says, we admonish you to serve all nations and to strive for the betterment of the world. This is, of course, enormously important to our considerations of social and economic development. Now, in the Will and Testament of Abdul-Baha tells us how the wondrous system, remember that statement by Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, how this wondrous system is to be realized. The Will and Testament extends, for instance, the function of authorized interpretation in the appointment of Shoghi Effendi as guardian. It explains for the first time in any literature of the faith how the Universal House of Justice is to be established. You know, that Baha'u'llah tells us about the House of Justice in his writings. He keeps referring things to the Universal House of Justice. He tells us that God will verily inspire them with whatsoever He willeth, but He doesn't tell us how it will come about. You go to the Will and Testament and you find that out. This is part of the completion of the arrangement of the Aqdas and the Kitab-i-Ad, those arrangements. Now, in this connection also, the matter of establishing the House of Justice and telling us what its functions should be, in this connection, the Will and Testament also reveals the necessity of secondary houses of justice, which we know now as national spiritual assemblies. The members of these secondary houses of justice are the electors of that supreme body. The Will and Testament instructs us as to how the faith is to be protected. It tells us to teach the faith. It elaborates much of the guidance given in the Kitab-i-Ad. Now, taken together, the provisions of these two documents complete the structure of the covenant of Baha'u'llah, and we are able, both from their texts and from the actions of Abdul-Baha as the exemplar of the teachings, to derive an appreciation of its uniqueness and dynamism. Instruction and experience have made the efficacy of the covenant quite clear, whether as the harbinger of unity or as the very bastion of the faith. The covenant, as we have learned from Abdul-Baha, is indeed the axis of world unity. All that we do revolves around it. The covenant incorporates the essentials of the faith. It connects souls with Baha'u'llah and his purpose. From this connection, these souls derive the divine confirmations that nourish their faith and energize their efforts. The covenant unites peoples. It trains and prepares human resources. Just read it and see what instructions we get from the two documents. It activates and sustains the system that guarantees success of the plan of God in our time. In other words, it applies practice to principle with a coherence that translates the central theme of the Baha'i revelation into a living and universal reality. The covenant is the ultimate guide for teaching and administration of the faith. Now, Abdu'l-Baha, as the center of the covenant, is the divinely chosen instrument that connects all elements of the revelation in a workable plan of action. His will and testament, Shoghi Effendi states, should be regarded as the perpetual, the indissoluble link which the mind of him who is the mystery of God, who is the mystery of God? Abdu'l-Baha, Baha'u'llah called him the mystery of God, who is the mystery of God, has conceived in order to ensure the continuity of the three ages that constitute the component parts of the Baha'i dispensation. Now, what are these three ages? We know the heroic age, the period in which Baha'u'llah, the Bab and Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha lived, and the great period for massive martyrdoms, that period, and then the period that followed that after the passing of Abdu'l-Baha, the formative age in which we now live, meaning this is the age of building, this is the age of shaping the institutions and moving towards a world order, a world civilization. And then the third is the golden age, which we hope will be attained in due course. Now, so Abdu'l-Baha's role, the things that he did, the way that he lived, connected all of these things, because he gave us the explanations, he gave us the full picture of the structure that should guide our actions until the next manifestation of God arrives on the planet. The center of the covenant, indeed, has left detailed explanations and instructions, both for teaching and for the operation of an administrative order. Now, if the covenant is the axis of the oneness of humankind, Abdu'l-Baha is at the very center of that axis, both as interpreter and exemplar. Interpreter of the word, he is, with respect to the means of realizing the oneness of mankind. He translates the meaning of the word into intention and deeds, telling us how to activate the divinely ordained system that is to usher in the new world order envisioned by Baha'u'llah. He also translates meaning in relation to personal conduct by exemplifying the principles, or you might say the virtues, of the revelation in his own life. So we have both the theory of it and the practice of it and the example of it in Abdu'l-Baha. In his person, as in his words, the covenant becomes a living ideal manifested in both mystical and practical terms. Remember, it was I think the president of Stanford University, when Abdu'l-Baha spoke there, said that described Abdu'l-Baha as a person who tread the mystical path with practical feet. Thus, he is the medium between word and outcome in all the implied purposes of the covenant. Meaning is realized in deed, action, system, structure. Abdu'l-Baha is the very embodiment of the covenant. Absent Abdu'l-Baha, the world order of Baha'u'llah would not exist. The reality of the covenant would remain hidden. All right, let us return briefly to Baha'u'llah's admonition in the book of his covenant. Serve all nations and strive for the betterment of the world. A response of the Universal House of Justice to this imperative of the Covenant is given in its message to the Baha'i world dated 20 October 1983, in which it directs attention to the need for Baha'i action in advancing social and economic development throughout the world. The message legitimizes Baha'i involvement in social and economic development by showing that this is congruent with the central principle of the Baha'i faith, which of course is the oneness of humankind. The oneness of mankind, it states, this letter, this message, implies the achievement of a dynamic coherence between the spiritual and practical requirements of life on earth. I'll read that again. The oneness of mankind implies the achievement of a dynamic coherence between the spiritual and practical requirements of life on earth. Now, to reinforce this assertion, the message goes on to say, the indispensability of this coherence is unmistakably illustrated in Baha'u'llah's ordination of the Mashriq al-Azkar, the spiritual center of every Baha'i community, around which must flourish dependencies dedicated to the social, humanitarian, educational, and scientific advancement of mankind. Of course, we're talking about the house of worship in each case. And we know that the dependencies include what? Orphanage, home for the aged, university, and all of that. Institutions that cater to the welfare of the human race and the development of the human race. And thus, the House of Justice loses no time in driving home the point that, quote, the concept of social and economic development is enshrined in the sacred teachings of our faith. Simply stated, it is inseparable from the covenant. Has Baha'u'llah not said in the Eshakat that the progress of the world, the development of nations, the tranquility of peoples, and the peace of all who dwell on earth are among the principles and ordinances of God? He said this. Now that the vital importance of social and economic development has been verified, how is it to be done? How is it to be done? A major paragraph of this message speaks directly to the point, and I think you must be familiar with this. It says, now, after all the years of constant teaching activity, the community of the greatest name has grown to the stage at which the processes of this development must be incorporated into its regular pursuits. It goes on to say that the steps to be taken must necessarily begin in the Baha'i community itself, with the friends endeavoring through their application of spiritual principles, their rectitude of conduct, and the practice of the art of consultation to uplift themselves and thus become self-sufficient and self-reliant. This is a very important point. And in countries where people are not as developed as we think we are here, these principles hold and do produce the kinds of results that we hope for in this respect. Moreover, the message goes on, these exertions will conduce to the preservation of human honor, so desired by Baha'u'llah. So you see, the question of social and economic development is concerned not only with the material development of people, but also the spiritual concepts involved, of honor, of dignity, and so on. In the process, and as a consequence, the message goes on, the Friends will undoubtedly extend the benefits of their efforts to society as a whole, until all mankind achieves the progress intended by the Lord of the age. And then the House of Justice informs us of a vital point. It says progress in the development field will depend largely on natural stirrings at the grassroots, and it should receive its driving force from those sources rather than from an imposition of plans and programs from the top. I was just reading an article in the New York Times recently about some efforts in Afghanistan to develop people. And they found that where the local people were allowed to discuss their concerns and to make decisions about them, that things were beginning to work. In other circumstances where dollars were thrown at them and the big boys came in and told them what to do, things failed. I have the article, I don't want to read it to you, but it's in my sack here. Now, who is responsible for undertaking this effort? We know from the House of Justice that the National Spiritual Assemblies are called upon to take well-conceived measures to involve the thought and actions of local spiritual assemblies and individuals in the devising and implementing of plans within the constraints, and this is important, within the constraints of existing circumstances and available resources. In other words, we shouldn't go beyond the possibilities of our resources and our circumstances, but certainly we should strive. And it then tells us that ultimately the call to action is addressed to the individual friends, whether they be adult or youth, veteran or newly enrolled. So this whole exercise, this whole development, this work is something that involves us all, whatever our age, if we have the heart and the will to act. The House of Justice says, let them step forth. That is, these individuals, adults and youth, let them step forth to take their places in the arena of service, where their talents and skills, their specialized training, their material resources, their offers of time and energy, and above all, their dedication to Bahá'í principles can be put to work in improving the lot of man. You see, we cannot act without principles to guide our actions and to open up possibilities for us. So then, what are the principles that enable action, or the actions to which the message refers? We are told spiritual principles. Well, this is a framework. Among these principles we have, for instance, equality of men and women, the equality of the sexes, elimination of prejudice, these kinds of things that you know, and I don't have to recite them. But then the House of Justice specifies in its early paragraph on this thing, 2, rectitude of conduct and consultation. Now, this rectitude of conduct is the rubric under which Shoghi Effendi discusses principles of justice, equity, honesty, fair-mindedness, truthfulness, trustworthiness, reliability. Speaking of justice, Baha'u'llah, as you know, has told us in the hidden words that this is the best beloved of all things in his sight. And he tells us individually how to behave in terms of carrying out that principle. And he tells us in another of his writings, he says, what this wronged one doth expect from everyone is justice and fairness. The House of Justice is calling our attention to this rectitude of conduct, which, by the way, is mentioned 2 or 3 times in the Will and Testament of Abdul Baha. And it is in this Advent of Divine Justice that we find a full discussion of the meaning of rectitude of conduct. Now, as to consultation, the art of consultation, as the House of Justice states it, that involves collective engagement in reaching understandings, initiating efforts, and resolving problems. It is, to be sure, a major element of the key to success in social and economic development. So if we are to exploit the stirrings at the grassroots, we must hear from the people. And to hear from the people is to consult, to encourage them to consult among themselves and to hear the results of such consultation. I think then that we should ponder for a while what is meant by the art of consultation, since it is so vital to the whole process. I think it's time for a joke. It's number 2. All right, that's good. Think about it. Now, about consultation, we know that the dictionary tells us that it means discussion, it means taking counsel, seeking advice, and such. It means all of that to us in our faith. Baha'u'llah says, in all things it is necessary to consult. In all things it is necessary to consult. Then he says, this matter should be forcibly stressed. This matter should be forcibly stressed. This matter of consultation being all important. So that consultation may be observed by all, he says. The intent, he goes on, of what hath been revealed from the pen of the Most High is that consultation may be fully carried out among the friends, inasmuch as it is and will always be a cause of awareness and of awakening and a source of good and well-being. He wants us to forcibly stress the importance of this thing. Abdul Baha tells us, settle all things, both great and small, by consultation. Settle all things, both great and small, by consultation. Then Baha'u'llah engages us in a discussion of consultation. He puts a frame to it that is most interesting, I find. And all of these are in this compilation on consultation that's available to you. Baha'u'llah says, no man can attain his true station except through his justice. Right? In other words, the person has to be just to attain his full station. He says, no power can exist except through unity. No welfare, he goes on, and no well-being can be attained except through consultation. no well-being, no welfare. Now, all of these elements of justice and unity are indispensable to consultation. And the consultation reinforces unity, and it enables the use of power that comes from that unity in the right way, in making use of the results from that consultation. And justice is applied to the whole process of consultation. We have to be fair-minded, we have to have equity, and so on and so on. Now, about justice, I was struck by a statement that Baha'u'llah has made. He says that he that is unjust in his judgment is destitute of the characteristics that distinguish man's station. Critical piece of information here. He that is unjust in his judgment is destitute of the characteristics that distinguishes man's station. Our rulers should bear this in mind. So, no welfare and no well-being can be attained except through consultation. Baha'u'llah tells us it is a cause of awareness and of awakening. He says it is the lamp of guidance which leads the way. He calls it the bestower of understanding. He says it is a shining light which in a dark world leadeth the way and guideth. And I like this particular statement that he makes of it. He says it transmutes conjecture into certitude. It takes the guesswork out of things. It transmutes conjecture into certitude. The maturity of the gift of understanding is made manifest through consultation. The heaven of the divine wisdom is illumined, he says, with the two luminaries of consultation and compassion. Now, what does this combination mean? Consultation and compassion. He says that the heaven of divine wisdom is illumined with these two luminaries. Consultation and compassion. What does compassion have to do with this? With justice and so on. And yet it does have a lot to do with it. The way that my take on this part of the compassion thing is that, the institutions do have to consult on cases where people have broken the law. And sometimes these people deserve punishment. Now, where does the compassion come in if you're going to punish somebody? The fact of the matter, I think, is that in all that we do, in every consideration that we make about things and about people, we should bear one thing in mind at all times, that these people are creatures of God, that they have souls, that they are entitled to their dignity and their honor. And so whatever we do in relation to them, whether it's the institution in terms of punishing them or whatever, we must preserve the dignity and the honor and have concern for the spiritual essence of people. Now, the punishment is perhaps well-deserved, and it can be administered without robbing that person of his dignity. It's a very important concept for us to contemplate. Now, consultation is applied in our individual lives, in our personal activities, as well as in our institutional and administrative life. Now, let's look a little bit at the administrative involvement and relationship of this. Shoghi Effendi tells us, consultation, frank and unfettered, is the bedrock of this unique order. Consultation, frank. Look at his descriptions here. Frank and unfettered. Frank means you must tell the truth. Sometimes in consultation we want to protect others. We don't want to embarrass them, or we don't want to appear to be ratting on somebody and we hold back information from the institutions. That's not frankness, that's deception. Unfettered means we should be free to speak, and I will get into that later on. The Guardian goes on to say also that the principle of consultation, which constitutes one of the basic laws of the administration, should be applied to all Baha'i activities which affect the collective interests of the faith, for it is through cooperation and continued exchange of thoughts and views that the cause can best safeguard and foster its interests. So an aspect of consultation is, of course, cooperation. Now, how do the institutions do this? And I think that by discussing the institutions and what they do, we gain a proper sense of how we in our individual lives might conduct consultation. We quote from Abdul Baha in terms of the actions of assemblies, spiritual assemblies. He says, the prime requisites for them that take counsel together are purity of motive, radiance of spirit, detachment from all else save God, attraction to his divine fragrances, humility and lowliness amongst his loved ones, patience and long-suffering in difficulties, and servitude to his exalted threshold. Now that says it all. Now friends, think about this. You're going into a room to make a decision, 9 of you. And you know that you have to apply the laws and the principles to the decisions you have to make. But what Abdul Baha is telling us here is that that's not enough. Those are the mechanics of getting decisions made. But you have a spirit to decision making, which is incredibly important. Purity of motive, for instance. Purity of motive. Think of that. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you saying what you're saying? Why are you deciding what you're deciding? What spirit do you take to this? Your intention is to fulfill the will of God, to take care of his people, to take care of his order, to make sure that it works. That is the motive, to serve him. That has to go into the consideration. Radiance of spirit, how do you achieve that? Consultation in assemblies can be pretty rugged and pretty, disturbing. How do you maintain radiance of spirit? Well, for whom are you working? It's through the teachings, the elevation that comes from understanding the teachings. And this radiance of spirit, think of what a local spiritual assembly represents. Baha'u'llah tells us in the Kitab-i-Aqdas and other tablets that the members of these institutions, and I'm talking now about the local houses of justice, the local spiritual assemblies, should regard themselves as the guardians of all who dwell on earth. He says that they should, when they enter their meetings, they should consider that they are entering the presence of God. Furthermore, he says that the glances of God are directed towards that assembly. Abdul Baha tells us that he spreads his wings over the local spiritual assemblies. He calls them lamps that shine, that illumine their jurisdiction. He says that they are the potent sources of the progress of man at all times and under all conditions. Now, With that kind of understanding, you can afford to maintain radiance of spirit. When those 9 people go into their council chamber and call upon God and pray and do their business, they have access to the divine. The glances of God are directed towards that assembly. Baha'u'llah says, we should be very careful how we regard these institutions. Just because our bodies are on it doesn't mean that we should, treat them as our bodies. Treat the institution as our body. It's not our body. It's the institution that God has put in our midst. It is the nucleus, to me, of the civilization which is to be raised in any jurisdiction. And we better have a proper respect for them. All right. So radiance of spirit, think about that. Detachment from all else save God. In other words, you have no personalities that you're attached to when you're in the meeting. You are there to deal with questions of truth and fact. Justice now is a very important thing here. Justice, equity, honesty, fair-mindedness. So if you're sitting in an assembly meeting and it has to do with something that a brother or a sister did that was wrong, you can't afford to be defending that there. You have to detach yourself from brother, sister. You have to hook yourself to the principles and the laws and act as if you are one of the trustees of the merciful. Humility. The Guardian once told us in one of his letters that the members of spiritual assemblies shouldn't consider themselves as the ornaments of the faith. In other words, they know better than everybody else and they're prancing around and sparkling like. Lowliness. The members of the spiritual assembly are brothers and sisters, and so on. So you see the point I'm making. Now he tells us this: the members thereof must take counsel together, in other words, consult, in such wise that no occasion for ill feeling or discord may arise. This can be attained when every member expresseth with absolute freedom his own opinion and setteth forth his argument. Should anyone oppose, he must on no account feel hurt, for not until matters are fully discussed can the right way be revealed. You see. In other words, don't get upset if somebody disagrees. What is the point here? He says, the shining spark of truth cometh forth only after the clash of differing opinions. So we can afford to have warfare with ideas and opinions in our council chambers. It's the only occasion in which we are permitted to have a clash in matters, because Baha'u'llah has forbidden conflict and contention in our relationships. He says, if after discussion a decision be carried unanimously, well and good. But if the Lord forbid, differences of opinion should arise, a majority of voices must prevail. Now elsewhere he tells us that we should not, if we were in the minority in the question, go out of the meeting and criticize the decision of the majority, because this is not a proper way to do things. In fact, after the majority have decided, the minority joins them in carrying out the decision that's been made. Now we also know that the decision of an assembly could possibly be wrong. But so what? He says that if they agree upon a subject, that is, if they agree because there's purity of motive, they've gone in, they've done the things properly. If they agree upon a subject, even though it be wrong, it is better than to disagree and be in the right. For this difference will produce the demolition of the divine foundation. He says, though one of the parties may be on the right and they disagree, that will be the cause of 1,000 wrongs. But if they agree and both parties are in the wrong, as it is in unity, the truth will be revealed and the wrong made right. Now that is a matter of faith as well. The Guardian tells us, he says, we all have a right to our opinions. we are bound to think differently. But a Baha'i must accept the majority decision of his assembly, realizing that acceptance and harmony, even if a mistake has been made, are the really important thing. And when we serve the cause properly in the Baha'i way, God will right any wrongs done in the end. Now, this is a very different way of thinking from the way the world thinks. And I'm now going to read to you a quote that I discovered many, many years ago. I was in the library in Greenacre reading old issues of the Star of the West, and I came upon this quote. It actually changed my life in a certain way and made it easy for me to function on institutions. Listen to what Abdul Baha is saying here. He says, "Blessed are they who are the means of making unity among the friends, and pity on those who in the right or wrong are the cause of discord." For instance, when one is in the right in a case, in dispute, and his minority prevents him from establishing this rightful matter, instead of agitating the subject, if he will humbly submit to sacrifice his position for the sake of unity and peace, God will accept that sacrifice, and ere long the rightful matter will be established without any further dispute. Have you ever heard a thing like this? That in consultation, assuming that you're right, you can't get the majority to agree, you make sure that you've explained yourself fully. That's not the point. You should. But once you've done it, if the others don't get it and they're doing other things, don't agitate. God will accept this submissiveness as a sacrifice from you. This is an amazing thing. This is a matter of faith. You see then that it relaxes your nerves and you don't have to get so excited about your opinions. And sometimes you're wrong anyhow. I mean, I have experienced situations where, I have a great idea, toss it on the table and leave it out there, and it gets knocked around by the others. By the time, it goes for 2 or 3 rounds, you realize that you were very foolish, and you yourself turn around and vote against your own idea. So, friends, this is the nature of consultation, the institutions. Individuals should practice it in this same spirit. You know, for instance, that there are different occasions for consultation. For elected institutions that have to make decisions that we have to obey and follow, and for appointed corporate bodies in the faith, the object of the consultation of elected corporate bodies is to do what? To make decisions. They're supposed to make decisions that will lead to action. The object of other bodies, such as the 19-day feast, the unit convention, the national convention, and so on, and the annual meeting in your local community, the object of this is to do what? To offer advice and recommendations to the institutions. It is fascinating that the cause allows us, any one of us, to present an idea in the proper setting, and that idea, if agreed to by our fellow believers through consultation, as the first level of processing. You don't just willy-nilly send 1,000,000 ideas to the institutions. There's a way of processing them and winnowing them down, bringing them to measurable levels. Then that goes to the institutions that have the obligation to consider them. Now for individuals, well, I'll wait for the individuals. The Guardian tells us this about all of this discussion and consultation. He says, let us remember that at the very root of the cause lies the principle of the undoubted right of the individual to self-expression, his freedom to declare his conscience and set forth his views. We know, for instance, that sometimes we have critical things to say, and the faith allows us to criticize certain things. in the proper setting. In the case of the 19-day feast, if you feel something is going wrong, you have a right to say so. But listen to how you do it. The House of Justice wrote about this in a message that it addressed to this community in 1988, and it's published under Individual Rights and Freedoms in the World Order of Baha'u'llah. The House of Justice says the administrative order provides channels for expression of criticism, acknowledging as a matter of principle that, and it's quoting from The Guardian now, it is not only the right but the vital responsibility of every loyal and intelligent member of the community to offer fully and frankly, but with due respect and consideration of the authority of the Assembly, any suggestion, recommendation, or criticism he conscientiously feels he should in order to improve and remedy certain existing conditions or trends in the local community. Correspondingly, the Assembly has the duty to give careful consideration, as the Guardian says, to any such views submitted to them. So there you have it. We're all free to speak, but the manner in which we speak is important, both inside institutions and outside of them. Now, for individuals, the Master tells us that we should consult. He says that consultation is one of the explicit ordinances of the Lord of the age. He says the purpose of consultation is to show that the views of several individuals are assuredly preferable to one man's, even as the power of a number of men is, of course, greater than the power of one man. Thus, consultation, he goes on, is acceptable in the presence of the Almighty and hath been enjoined upon the believers, so that they may confer upon ordinary and personal matters, as well as on affairs which are general in nature and universal. He goes on to give us an example. He says, for instance, when a man hath a project to accomplish, should he consult with some of his brethren, that which is agreeable and will of course be investigated and unveiled to his eyes, and the truth will be disclosed. Likewise, on a higher level, should the people of a village consult one another about their affairs, the right solution will certainly be revealed. In like manner, the members of each profession, such as in industry, should consult, and those in commerce should similarly consult on business affairs. In short, consultation is desirable and acceptable in all things and on all issues. Now, have you noticed of late that we have grown a crop of consultants? That business is doing more consulting than ever before? Don't you think that the spirit of the age of the teachings have caught up with society and they're doing this thing? So the Master says, settle all things, both great and small, by consultation. Without prior consultation, take no personal step in your own personal affairs. All right, let's come to a conclusion about all of this. Here are some of my own opinions about consultation and what it means to me. I don't know what you think of it. Take this as a block of salt. I don't care. For me, consultation is a civilizing instrument. It's the greatest means for tapping the collective genius of the human mind for the common good. It transforms genius into practical achievements. It enables people to chart the course and set the pace of their development. It is a mighty tool in the hands of the weak, a measure of upliftment for all. It is the surest means, so far as I see, for determining the destiny of peoples, in that it enables people to take charge of their affairs, no matter how humble their circumstances. If I had time, I'd tell you a story about a local assembly that was 2 years old and how they were able to do some things that was, to me, quite astonishing. Consultation guarantees the progress of humanity at any level and at any time. It's a powerful means of evolutionary development and revolutionary action. It civilizes and planetizes our relationships. I also see it as a discipline of social organization that moderates the extremes of human passion. It transfers war from the battlefield to the council chamber, where the clash of opinions produces the sparkles. In other words, it transmutes war into peace. No longer do we have to march into the battle on the battlefield and shoot each other down. Now, this consultation also, to my mind, lends practical value to unity as an instrument of progress. No consultation. What do you do with all this lovey-dovey stuff? All this unity and all being together doesn't mean anything unless you can produce progress from it. It is the channel through which unity exerts its influence as a force for progress. It ensures the resilience and flexibility by which the forces of social evolution are canalized towards constructive ends. I'm done?
No, you're not.
Oh. What?
Better news is that he's not done.
Yeah.
You have 15 more minutes, so
All right.
want to use some of the questions. You decide that, but you can speak to us for 15 more minutes.
Okay. All right. Very good. Now, friends, I got a little leave here. I have some minutes. I'll tell you about the story when I said that it is the surest means for determining the destinies of people, in that it enables people to take charge of their affairs, no matter how humble their circumstances, that it is a mighty tool in the hands of the weak. In 1984 or 5, thereabouts, the House of Justice received a letter from a National Spiritual Assembly in one of the so-called third world countries. And the Assembly was extremely excited in what it had to report to the House of Justice. It was about an assembly that was just 2 months old. It was a village assembly. All the members were illiterate. They got together to meet in the early period of their ministry, those first 2 months. And one of the points that came up in their consultation was that Baha'u'llah had instructed that children should be educated. So this local assembly is saying, what are we to do about this? Remember, none of them can read. They decided, so they talked about it. One of the members of the assembly said, you know, I don't have much. I have this little plot of ground where I have my little house, but I'm willing to allow the assembly to build a room on the space next to my house as a classroom for children. Now, you have to think of what has happened here. The assembly starts out with 0, and now it has created some muster. It's got land it can do something with. So they discuss what they should do about this classroom, they're building this room and all of that. And then they have to discuss what is to be done about the teaching part, because we don't read, we don't know anything, we have to find somebody who can teach them. And so somehow or another they racked their brains and they decided on somebody, I don't know whether it was a Bahá'í or not, man or woman, who would be asked to teach their children. The question is, if this person is going to take time away from his or her whatever livelihood, whatever work he's doing to teach their children, how is this person to live? So they decided among themselves, okay, we will do things, we are farmers here and so on, we will do a little more and produce food and things to help this person so that they don't have to worry about their livelihood. Then they talked about some of them offered to go into the bush and catch monkeys and take them to the marketplace and sell them to buy chalk and chalkboard for the children and so on. You know, this thing is years ago, but it has made such an impression on my mind. I remember every detail of it. I won't tell you all the details. The one thing that stumped them was that they didn't know what their children should be taught exactly, the curriculum. So they decided, we better ask the National Assembly that question. Now look at what has happened here, friends. This group of people decided to take their destiny into their hands, to decide what they needed, how they would go about producing that need. And where they couldn't answer a question, they knew where to turn to get an answer. That to me was the beginning of civilization in that village. They had big ideas. For instance, I don't know, they must have had a marvelous pioneer that taught them, because they decided that they wanted to have a conference on women. Now it was, I think, the year preceding the International Year of Women. How they heard about that, only God knows in the bush there. But they did. And they wanted a conference. And I wanted you to know that in this letter here it explained what they were going to do to have this conference, including getting youth to usher the guests that they would bring in, and even preparing starched sheets on which their guests would sleep. It's all in that report. Then they looked around and they didn't like the scruffiness of their village. It needed fixing. They said, we better clean up this place. So, there's an example for you. Raw like that. The assembly was 2 months old. So let me go on. The Baha'i principles of consultation set a new standard for public discourse. I wish we could teach our public officials how to do this. It is not a mere social mechanism for decision making. It is a sure and accessible means of engaging the Holy Spirit in the ordinary affairs of humankind. Now, isn't that something? Isn't that something? We can actually attract the divine presence when our institutions go into this consultation. As Baha'u'llah says, they should regard themselves as entering the presence of God. Now, properly conducted, consultation invites the presence and intervention of the divine. As we know, in the case of local and national assemblies, they get guidance. In the case of the House of Justice, it gets guidance, and it is guaranteed infallibility. So what might we conclude? Consultation is a gift of God to our age, and is the birthright of every human being. Truly, an inheritance that empowers the meek. Right? Okay. So, shall the meek inherit the earth? Baha'u'llah has laid out the plan and said, here it is, kids, take it. Now, for an assurance of hope in our efforts in social and economic development, I quote from The Guardian, and the House of Justice also quoted in its letter. This is what he said in 1933 to the Friends. He says, the problems which confront the believers at the present time, whether social, spiritual, economic, or administrative, will be gradually solved as the number and the resources of the Friends multiply and their capacity for service and for the application of Baha'i principles develops. They should be patient, confident, and active in utilizing every possible opportunity that presents itself within the limits now necessarily imposed upon them. May the Almighty, he says, aid them to fulfill their highest hopes. So friends, that ends my whole discourse. Is there time for a question or two? Or do we...
There's 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, come on. If you have a question or so, I'm willing to take a chance with it. Yes, somebody's advancing to the microphone here. Yeah.
Top here, they said. Testing?
Oh, yes.
It works. Speak loudly because the friends sometimes can't hear from those microphones.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's not really a question.
All right.
I just wanted to thank you. It was a wonderful talk.
I appreciate it. You see, if you hadn't prayed for me, I wouldn't have come. So you owe it to yourselves and your prayers.
I'm struggling with trying to learn to use a consultative method with people in the world who are not as interested in being truthful or in justice.
Right.
And I feel like I've come to some understanding of consultation in our assembly, in my community, in my marriage, but I am just clueless with using a consultative method in this other kind of context.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this person is trying to see how it is possible to use the principles of consultation or to engage people outside of the assembly experience that she has or her own personal experience at home, the people out there, how to engage them in this. Well, that is something that you will have to work on depending on how you judge the circumstance in which you find yourself. The fact of the matter is that the world is turning towards consultation. Businesses have adopted this as a major means of progress. And I think that it depends on how you get into it. Rather than preaching to them about it, maybe you could invite them into a discussion without telling them what you're doing. And just say, listen, we have this headache here. Let's talk about it. What do you think? Bring them together and just practice it. And then gradually you can give them pointers as to how to make a success of it. I don't know what else to say.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Recently we've had the opportunity to participate in a talk or a course called The Cluster and the Covenant.
Uh-huh.
And in the process, we began to see a little bit more clearly how the insertion of agencies have been inserted into the administrative order, and been told that it's still not somewhat clear exactly what the roles of these agencies are still evolving, and yet that there is a difference. The learned are inserted in a different way to confuse us somewhat about the authority of the assembly. And I'm just wondering, having participated in a number of reflection meetings that somehow didn't involve consultation, but more or less announcing different goals and so on, and that's been frustrating. It's difficult to figure out exactly how consultation is working in this new kind of configuration of implementation of the 5-year plans. Could you help us a bit with that?
Well, friends, I, as you know, I'm a foreigner. I just came from Haifa a few months ago. So I haven't lived here for a quarter of a century. So I don't know what you're doing these days. But I can tell you this. That, as Baha'u'llah says, in all things we should consult. He's the one that has emphasized the importance of it. When you are in gatherings where that isn't done, you should insist upon it, because it is a principle of the cause. This is part of what has been given to you: frankness, candor, freedom of speech. And if the principles of the faith are not being applied, you don't have to participate in things where principles are violated. you should make your views known. But invite the practice of consultation. You expect the House of Justice to come down here and tell a local assembly to consult or tell some reflection group to consult, when in fact the whole point of the exercise is to consult. That's what reflection is all about, so far as I understand it. Now, I haven't been in reflection meetings. I don't know that I need to go to any of them. But I think that consultation is at the very heart of that whole idea of reflections, because I think we're supposed to be in a learning mode. And you can't learn unless you're discussing things among yourselves. And if there are those among you who stop you from consulting, you can kindly remind them, sorry, we are Baha'is here. We consult to understand things. Please allow us to do what Baha'u'llah has told us to do. And you'll see what happens. I'm done. This is the cop that came to get me.
Please thank Mr. Mitchell.